Even though they play in different divisions, the Seahawks and Packers have a storied rivalry. It's been a few years since they've last played. We're going to be looking back at some of those most iconic games here on a jam-packed Matchup Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be teaming up with my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s tuning in, whether you are in Medical Lake, Washington, or Appleton, Wisconsin. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks and Packers gearing up for the latest in their storied rivalry, the first time they've played since 2021. They'll be on Sunday Night Football at Lumen Field. We've got 6 key positional battles to break down in our latest installment of Matchup Wednesday, brought your way by our friends at FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The Seahawks and Packers have never been in the same division, but as far as rivalries are concerned, at least in the last 20 years, there may not be a better out-of-division rivalry in the NFC than the one between the Seahawks and the Packers. They've played a ton of playoff games against each other, both in the Holmgren and the Pete Carroll era, whether it was Aaron Rodgers going up against Russell Wilson or Matt Hasselbeck going up against Brett Favre. We have seen so many iconic games and honestly ones that one side of one fan base loved and the other side is looking back with infamy, wondering how the game slipped away. But that's what has made this such an iconic rivalry over the years.
Yeah, no question about it, Corbin. It's not just the wins and losses on the football field. You mentioned the name Mike Holmgren, of course. Mike Holmgren obviously having his previous success, his Super Bowl title with the Green Bay Packers before the Seahawks lured him to Seattle. John Schneider, of course, cut his teeth, with the Green Bay Packers as well. And then being brought over to the Seahawks. And so to me, that is one of the things that makes this rivalry that much more fascinating. Look, we can talk about Matt Hasselbeck, and we're going to take the ball, we're going to score. We talk about Golden Tate and going up to get that touchdown, which was a touchdown, not an interception. All of the different things. I mean, that's one of the things that makes this matchup so much fun. And this is not a one-sided rivalry. This is a game. This is a rivalry that has had winners on both sides that basically felt like they kind of stole that one. And so that's what's going to make this, I think, that much more fascinating, because you have two, quarterbacks who are pretty much inexperienced when it comes to this rivalry. And Geno Smith and Jordan Love, both of them obviously have had their success in the NFL, but haven't necessarily had it against this opponent. So I do think that this is going to be kind of a fascinating matchup, especially when you consider it's not just the quarterbacks. I mean, think about all the other skill position talent that really have started to ascend. Let's just focus in on the Seahawks for a moment here. Obviously, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, but Jackson Smith and Jigba has now ascended to become basically Seattle's top wide receiver. He has never really played against the Green Bay Packers. You go back to the Green Bay Packers side, Josh Jacobs has become the superstar for the Packers. Of course, he was with the Las Vegas Raiders, all this time. So again, this feels like a matchup that goes back for years, as you said, and I agree with you. One of the most fascinating matchups in all of the NFC. But at the same time, it also is a game that is sprinkled in with an awful lot of inexperience in this matchup. So I think that Sunday Night Football is going to be one to remember.
Yep, it's a new chapter. You've got two quarterbacks that have never been part of this rivalry. I mean, Geno Smith was on the roster in Seattle in 2021. That was actually the first game that Russell Wilson came back from his injury. So Geno Smith had started the previous 3 games, and then Russell Wilson came back. He didn't take a snap in that game. Geno Smith has not played a single down of regular season football against the Green Bay Packers since 2014. That was his second season with the New York Jets, and the Jets were winning that game, and the Packers came back and stormed back and won it late. So that might be one that still sits with Geno Smith, not so pleasantly all these years later, but it has been a long time since he has played against the Packers, and Jordan Love has never played a regular season game against the Seahawks. So there's all kinds of new blood in this rivalry. Matt LaFleur coached in the last game, but for the most part, Mike McCarthy, he was the coach that was involved in all these games over the years on the sideline for the Packers. You had Mike Holmgren and Pete Carroll for the Seahawks. Now you got Mike McDonald throwing his hat in the ring. So you've got all this new blood that's going to be trying to rekindle this rivalry that, because of the schedule, we haven't seen him play for the last couple of seasons. But you mentioned some of the iconic games, and I want to take a moment just to go back because we may have some younger Seahawks fans that may not be as privy to this rivalry because they've only played one time since 2018. I mean, they had a playoff game sprinkled in there. They have one regular season game against each other. They haven't played very much as of late. But look, for those of you that are like me, who I remember one of my first not so memorable memories as a football fan was that 2003 wildcard game at Lambeau Field. And as you mentioned, and look, I had to correct you because you didn't say it exactly right, because I went to bed with these words humming in my head for months. We want the ball and we're going to score. Matt Hasselbeck getting caught, picked up by a hot mic, and then he throws a pick six to Al Harris. That was such a good football game up to that point. And for it to end that way, obviously for Green Bay fans, the Cheeseheads were absolutely loving it. It was mass hysteria. Seahawks fans, it's like, oh no, we need to get our bags out again from the 90s, and put them on our heads. But that was a game that, really was one of the games that got me super into football. I mean, I already liked football, but there was kind of a little bit of a vengeance to it. Like, we got to go back and win next year, and eventually Seattle did get to the Super Bowl a couple years later. But that game, then you have the infamous Fail Mary. That one worked in Seattle's favor with Golden Tate and multiple defenders for the Packers draped all over him. And the replacement refs call it a touchdown. And then they also called it an interception. And they had to decide what was it. And it was, again, mass hysteria. Oh, why? How could we forget John Ryan's touchdown he threw in the fake field goal, and then storming back in the NFC Championship game, getting the onside kick, and then Jermaine Kearse the game-winning touchdown. I mean, I just rattled off 3 games. There's been plenty of other games between these teams over the years that have been exciting, but those are the big 3. There's no question about it.
Oh, as you said, no question about it. And kind of going back to the one with Matt Hasselbeck, as you said, Corbin, that was a game that got you, really being a football fan. I mean, I was in San Francisco on the day of that game, going there to scout the East-West Shrine game, and I remember watching that game, watching Matt Hasselbeck, so frankly proud of the fact that I saw a Seahawks quarterback that had that type of confidence. And, it was a good throw, frankly. It was a bad route from the wide receiver. Al Harris was able to, steal that ball, go back and win the touchdown. And, that was a spectacular play by a very, very talented Green Bay Packers defensive back that made that big play there. But, of course, Matt Hasselbeck being a former Green Bay Packer quarterback himself, Mike Holmgren hand-selecting him, bringing him to Seattle. Those longtime Seahawks fans out there know that story. I want to go back to the playoff game that you mentioned, you referenced just a moment ago, and that being the one where, again, 2015, Gary Gilliam winds up catching that pass from John Ryan that basically, put this game into infamy in terms of, from a Green Bay Packers perspective, certainly a positive memory from a Seahawks perspective. It was a game where the Green Bay Packers I guess it would have been, it was Seattle at home. I'm not sure it was called Lumen Field at that point, Quest Field maybe. But the Seahawks were down 16-zip, and they wound up carving their way back. It was one of the games that really cemented Russell Wilson as far as being just the magician, the magical comeback that wound up being that overtime victory. Jermaine Kearse making one of several unbelievable catches and clutch moments that, again, just made this a fantastic rivalry, one of kind of hits and misses, and basically like 2 heavyweights just absolutely slugging it out. I'm excited for Sunday because I really think that this could be, as you said, new blood in this game, and a rivalry game that has had so many fascinating, exciting, iconic moments. I'm excited to see what's in store for us Sunday night.
I'm hoping we get to see some really good football on both sides, and I'm also hoping that we get some new memes because John Ryan birthed some of the greatest ones on that touchdown pass. The face like this. That is one of the most iconic pictures that has ever come out of any Seahawks playoff game. So hopefully we get something like that and some crazy plays like we always see in this rivalry with these new players and new coaches now getting to write their own chapter on Sunday night at Lumen Field. When we come back, speaking of that new chapter, we got to talk about some of the characters that are going to be playing a role in how this game unfolds. We've got matchup Wednesday. We're going to be looking at the Seahawks defense against the Packers offense. That'll be coming up here next on our matchup Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Built. Real talk, we've all been there feeling like we're burning cash with those rent checks, like we're the Joker on a Batman movie. It's frustrating, right? But here's the deal. Built Rewards has figured out a way to make rent more rewarding. Say goodbye to the money bonfire and hello to a renter's revolution with Built. Built is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent every month. Pay your rent and watch the Built points roll in. You can use the points to jet off on a dream vacation. Put your points toward a flight or a hotel stay with 500 plus airlines and 700,000 plus hotels and properties. You can even use your points to redeem them towards a future rent payment. They're designed to meet whatever your lifestyle is. Pay rent hassle-free with the Built Rewards app. Your rent game just got a major upgrade. Built points have been consistently ranked the highest value point currency by the Points Guy and Bankrate. Earn points by paying rent right now when you go to join built.com/LockedInNFL. That's JOINBILT.com/LockedInNFL. And make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Join built.com/LockedInNFL to start earning points today with your rent payments. Welcome back to Matchup Wednesday here on the Locked On Seahawks podcast. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be teaming up, as always, with my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Let's get to the matchup, shall we? And this one is truly going to feel, just because the teams have not played for 3+ years, but there's a lot of new faces. There'll be a few old faces from the old guard that we will discuss as we're diving into this matchup. But there's a lot of new players on both sides. You get 2 new coaches entering this rivalry, the new blood, as we mentioned. From a defensive perspective for the Seahawks, Rob, what matchup jumps out to you first heading into this marquee primetime matchup?
Well, I think from a Seahawks perspective, you got to get pressure on Julian Love. And I see 2 offensive tackles here with the Green Bay Packers in Zach Tom at the right tackle position, Rasheed Walker at the left tackle position. Look, I was high on both these players. Zach Tom was a 4th-round selection from Wake Forest. Rasheed Walker was a 7th-round selection from Penn State, but I personally gave him a 2nd to 3rd-round grade. One of the better offensive line draft evaluators, at least in my opinion. NFL.com's Lance Zierlein also gave him a 3rd-round grade. I was stunned when Rasheed Walker fell to the 7th round. Not at all surprised that he has since outlived or outplayed, I guess I should say, that draft ranking. But still, I view these as 2 offensive tackles that could struggle in this particular football game, just because Seattle has such a varied pass rush, as we talked about in yesterday's show, Corbin. I think you're going to see an angry and passionate Uchenna Nwosu. I think you're going to see the power that is Derek Hall. I'm very excited to see the speed that is Boye Mafe. We've talked about before, Boye Mafe just seems like he plays better against his former Big Ten foes. And as I mentioned before, with Rasheed Walker at that left tackle position, he's given up 2 sacks so far this season, but he has 6 penalties. And again, it's going to be on the crowd, frankly, to be able to kind of bring the voice, bring the passion, and on a Sunday night when they have all day long to kind of get themselves going. That, to me, is the matchup. The Seahawks have got to get some pressure on Jordan Love. They've got to be able to get some pressure.
I was going to correct you, but I was like, we're going to say this all week with Julian and Jordan Love.
And who are not related, by the way. But yes, again, that is one of the things, is that Jordan Love has been playing really good football here recently, has not been throwing the ball into harm's way. The Seahawks obviously have had some success here in recent weeks in creating turnovers for themselves. 2 interceptions, as we talked about, against the Arizona Cardinals and Kyler Murray. That, to me, is the number 1 matchup the Seahawks have got to be able to create some turnovers against Jordan Love.
And I'm looking from a perspective of run defense here as well, because Green Bay is one of the better running football teams in the NFL. And that was one of the things I liked about Rasheed Walker coming out of Penn State. I actually had a late first-round grade on him. There had to be some character stuff that led to him falling as far as he did. But the guy has a nasty streak, and he did at Penn State. He'll knock you off the ball. He plays with physicality. It was kind of hit and miss at times at the college level, but you certainly saw the mean streak that was there. You're seeing it on tape with the Green Bay Packers. That's one of the reasons he's got so many penalties this year, is because he'll get after it and sometimes a little bit too much. But both he and Tom's more of a, I don't want to say finesse blocker, but he is a guy that wins more with technique. Both these guys can win in the run game. So you're going to be looking at Draymond Jones. I think this is a huge game for Uchenna Nwosu to see a larger workload. I liked what I saw from him in 21 snaps last week. They need him to step up, particularly from the run defense aspect. But if you can get these tackles and you can get after them with your pass rush, with those varied rushers that they have here, the stable that they've built with a healthy Uchenna Nwosu now joining the mix, Jordan Love's a quarterback that'll throw the ball into double coverage, and he'll make bad decisions. He's one of the leaders in interceptions in the NFL this year because he is willing to take those chances. You can coax him into mistakes. So if they are able to do that with their pass rush, I think it gives Seattle a much better chance to be able to win this football game. As far as another matchup that we need to watch going into this one, Green Bay's got some really talented receivers. We could talk Christian Watson, who is one of the big play threats in the NFL. But my biggest concern, away from the run game, which we'll get to in a second, but Green Bay's got a really good young tight end in Tucker Kraft, who has 7 touchdown catches already this year. He can cause all kinds of problems after the catch. He's a super freaky athlete at 260 pounds. What did he do last week where he just kind of rolled on his back and just jumped off the ground and landed it like he was a gymnast? I mean, the guy is a freak athlete. And they're getting back Luke Musgrave, who was another athletic tight end that can block and catch the football. He practiced today. So those two guys, they can put their 12 personnel packages that they love to use, and they can get after you with a run game. And both these guys can also do damage as pass catchers. That's going to put a lot of pressure on Julian Love and the other safeties, Kobe Bryant and Rayshon Jenkins, in this matchup.
Yeah, I like that we're talking about Green Bay's tight ends against Seattle's safeties, just because, as you mentioned, I mean, Tucker Kraft and the fact that he has 7 touchdowns, not only does that lead the Green Bay Packers, Corbin, that's second in the NFL in touchdown receptions from a tight end. This is a guy who's in his second season out of South Dakota State, and then again, Luke Musgrave, Oregon State product that has a similar blend of size, speed, athletic ability. I was fortunate enough to go to Luke Musgrave's Pro Day workout in Corvallis, and he is a spectacular athlete for his size. So again, we all know that the Seahawks have struggled against the tight ends in the past, obviously against Arizona Cardinals. When we saw what Trey McBride was able to do, it seems like game in, game out, the opposing tight ends are able to make big plays. So whether it be Julian Love, whether it be Kobe Bryant, whether it be Rayshon Jenkins, obviously Seattle's tight ends are going to be having to keep an eye on, Josh Jacobs at the running back position. Jordan Love is a scrambler as well, but it's paramount that they are able to slow down Green Bay's tight ends, especially when they get into the red zone, where the Green Bay tight ends have really succeeded so far this season.
We'd be remiss not to mention that run game, though. When Josh Jacobs, the last time the Seahawks faced him at Lumen Field, this is going to give some PTSD, but he had that 60-plus yard touchdown run in overtime to beat the Seahawks on one play and then get the band off the field. It was a phenomenal run, but that was a different defense. That was a couple years ago, and that was in the middle of one of the worst stretches of run defense that I have ever seen from a Seahawks team. Obviously, the last 4 or 5 games, it's been a lot different since Ernest Jones came in, Tyrice Knight entered the lineup, the way that the secondary and the front line are playing against the run. But Josh Jacobs is as dangerous as any running back in the NFL. He's actually only 11th right now in the NFL in rushing yards, but he's got 11 rushing touchdowns, and he is a real difficult back to bring down at the initial point of contact. He creates a lot of yardage with missed tackles, breaking, and making guys miss. He's more elusive than advertised. So we mentioned in a lot of the games recently because there have been some really good running backs in the docket, but Josh Jacobs can also do damage as a pass catcher. This is going to be another really tricky assignment for Ernest Jones and Tyrice Knight to really show what they've done the last 4 or 5 weeks is for real, because this is a Packers team that will line up and they'll try to punch you in the mouth with their run game.
No question about it. And Corbin, I'm a big fan of James Conner, the Arizona Cardinals. We talked about him last couple of weeks, of course. For my money, with the exception of Saquon Barkley with the Philadelphia Eagles, I think that Josh Jones, now I'm spacing on his name, Josh Jacobs, excuse me. Can't get his name right, but I certainly know the game, if not the name. Josh Jacobs is one of the absolute spectacular backs in all of the NFL. I love the way that he is playing. His balance through contact is spectacular. As you said, he is more elusive than his statistics would give him credit for. The fact that he ran in a high 4.5s, low 4.6s, depending on the watches at his Alabama Pro Day a couple of years back. I mean, that was one of the reasons why some suggested that he was going to fall out of the first round, the Las Vegas Raiders. Then the Oakland Raiders wound up making him a first-round selection. And, of course, he led the NFL the year that he busted through with that breakaway touchdown while a member of the Raiders to beat the Seahawks. That, to me, is absolutely the scariest matchup in this football game. Look, with all due respect to, again, getting some pressure on Jordan Love at the quarterback position. If the Seahawks can't stop the opposing running game, then it doesn't matter if you can get any kind of pressure on their quarterback. I wanted to mention this matchup to start off the show, Corbin, but I just think that, again, if you are unable to get any kind of pressure on Jordan Love, then this could be a long day at the office, but that's kind of putting the cart ahead of the horse. The Seahawks have absolutely got to be able to slow down Green Bay's rushing attack, and they are facing a back that can make you miss, that can run you over, and it's like he's got some Sean Alexander to him. He plays better when it's inside the 10-yard line. And that is one of the reasons why he's got this 11 rushing touchdowns so far this season. It has the Green Bay Packers on pace to be one of the absolute best in all of the NFL in rushing touchdowns. And that's not something that is common to this Green Bay Packers rival. We know the Packers have often had spectacular quarterback play. They often haven't had spectacular physical running back play to go along with that. They certainly have that now with Josh Jacobs.
And it sets up the play action. And Green Bay is as good as any team in the NFL on play action. So if they're running the football, that can be night-night for the opposing defense because they're going to be able to run those play action plays from under center out of 12 personnel. They have killed teams doing that. They did it to Detroit last week on that Thursday night football game that they came up just short on. This is a dangerous offense, but taking Josh Jacobs out of the equation has got to be priority number one. When we come back, we're going to flip the script. The Seahawks on offense going up against the Packers' top 10 ranked scoring defense. We'll get to that up next here on Matchup Wednesday on Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Ice Shaker. I know you're like me and your holiday shopping list is, let's just say, far from complete. I'm at like 10% right now. If that's the case, I've got the perfect gift for the passionate sports fan in your life. Perhaps you've heard of Ice Shaker. Ice Shaker is now officially licensed with the NFL, NHL, NBA, and MLB, and it'll make the ideal gift. It was created and used by the Gronkowski brothers. Ice Shakers has sold over 1 million bottles, and they've changed the game with workout bottles. This gift is the one you've been looking for. Go to iceshaker.com and use the code LOCKEDONNFL at checkout to save 25% off your order. We're talking kitchen-grade stainless steel bottles that won't absorb odor like the plastic bottles do. They're third-party tested, and I've tested this out. They will hold ice for 30-plus hours. I'm actually closing in on 72 hours, and there's still a little bit of ice in my Ice Shaker. And the best part, they're fully customizable with your favorite team. Order your team-branded bottles today at iceshaker.com and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for 25% off your order. Ice Shakers, show your support for your teams with the best branded workout bottles on the market. Ice Shakers. Welcome back to the Wednesday edition. Maybe that's what Matchup Wednesday is going to be from now on, Rob. It'll be Men's Day here on the Locked On Seahawks podcast. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Matchup Wednesday underway here. We're going to flip the script. We just looked at the Seahawks on defense against a talented Packers offense. Now, Geno Smith and company going up against a Packers defense that ranked in the top 10 in scoring. They're actually in the top 10 in passing and rushing defense as well. There have been some games where they haven't matched that with the eye test, interestingly enough, but there's been some injuries that have been sprinkled in there. When you look at this game, Rob, from a Seattle offensive perspective, what's the first matchup that jumps out to you going up against the Packers?
No question about it to me. This is a matchup where I think that Geno Smith and Seattle's wide receivers have got to be kind of frothing at the mouth a little bit. Like, all right, Green Bay Packers, we know you've got an explosive offense. Just wait till you get a load of what we can do on offense as well. This feels like a matchup, Corbin, where, again, Geno Smith, Jackson Smith and Jigba, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. I really think that they can take advantage of a Green Bay Packers secondary. Now, that said, there's got to be pass protection. We'll get to that in a moment. Geno Smith has got to make good decisions with the football because, again, this is a Green Bay secondary that is absolutely one of the best in terms of turning the football over. Their safety, of course, McKinley, as we talked about in yesterday's show, leads the NFL with 7 interceptions. And the fact that Jair Alexander, easily the Green Bay Packers' best cornerback, returned to the practice field on Wednesday, that is a little bit troubling from a Seattle perspective. But at the same time, Jair Alexander, all 5'11", 185 pounds of him, can he handle DK Metcalf one-on-one, 6'4", 220 pounds, running in the 4.3s? I don't think that he can. I think that this is a game that if Seattle can protect Geno Smith a little bit, then there are going to be some opportunities to go deep down the field, and that thing is going to get the Seattle crowd going like a long touchdown. So again, while I'm excited about, just from a football perspective, throwing all allegiance out the window, I'm excited to see Green Bay Packers explosive offense against the Seattle defense that's playing with a great deal of physicality and instincts and all of that. In terms of just get your popcorn ready moment, I really think that Seattle's offense against Green Bay Packers secondary, their passing game in particular, to me, could create some of those exciting, iconic moments that we talked about in the first segment.
And I'm looking at the middle of the field. The Green Bay Packers have given up more catches in the middle of the field this year than any team in the NFL. And they're going to probably be missing Javon Bullard, their rookie out of Georgia. That means Keyshawn Nixon playing in against Jackson Smith and Jigba. But I don't know that there's a player right now that is better at chewing up opponents in the middle of the field than Jackson Smith and Jigba. He's got a size advantage there over Keyshawn Nixon. Jair Alexander going up against DK Metcalf. The matchup favors Metcalf from a size perspective, but I think that the slot is where Seattle can really attack that middle of the field and heck, get DK Metcalf running some routes in there and let him use his size and physicality. So I do think this can be a matchup that plays into Seattle's hands, not just with the chance to maybe take a shot play or two, but really eating up the intermediate game, those 10 to 19-yard completions in the middle of the field. I think that this matchup caters well for them to be able to do that. With that being said, this is one of those games where I think we've got to look at Geno Smith. We talked about it with Budda Baker and Arizona. You got a different type of safety in Xavier McKinney, but still it's the same mindset. Geno Smith's got to know where McKinney is at all times because this guy leads the NFL with 7 interceptions. He's a ball hawk. He will play near the line of scrimmage sometimes. He got a sack this season as well. He is one of those got to know where he is every single snap kind of players. And if you don't account for him, he is going to burn you. So this to me is as important of a matchup as any. From Geno Smith's perspective, with some of the interception issues he's had this year, you got to know where Xavier McKinney is at. And I'm not saying that you stay away from him, but you better know where he's at so that you're making smart decisions, or this guy will get an interception in this game that could change the tide of who wins at Lumen Field.
No question about it. I mean, that to me is the easy thing to look at as far as why Seattle has started to, get on this winning streak. I mean, Geno Smith is not turning the football over, and Seattle suddenly is able to both run the football and stop the run. And so if Geno Smith does not throw an interception in this football game, I feel pretty confident that Seattle is going to be able to escape this game against a team that I think is a legitimate Super Bowl contender in the Green Bay Packers with a victory. That That's the big question. And certainly when Xavier McKinney, as you mentioned, leading the NFL in interceptions, I think that's somebody that you have to focus in on. I think that Evan Williams, the other starting safety for the Packers for much of this season, he's a rookie out of Oregon. He is a very instinctive player. I think you have to watch out for him as well. Make sure that he doesn't have a happy homecoming to the Pacific Northwest, so to speak. If he is not on the field because he is struggling with injuries, as we mentioned, yesterday's show went down this past week against the Detroit Lions with the injury. He was limited in practice on Wednesday. Who knows if he is going to be available in this game? Then it will be his Oregon State former rival, Ketan Oladapo, who is going to wind up getting onto the field for the Green Bay Packers. Oladapo is built a little bit more like Cam Chancellor. He is more of a 6'3", 230-pound kind of a linebacker type. That would be another safety that I think that the Seahawks could target. I love the fact that you mentioned Jackson Smith and Jigba over the middle. I really think that this could be a game. And I think we saw flashes against the Cardinals. Jackson Smith and Jigba basically picking the ball up off the blade of grass and then running for extra yards. We haven't seen as much of that as I think that we could see when JSN takes his game to a whole other level. They run after the catch potential. We saw DK Metcalf catch the ball and then basically try to hurdle two different Arizona Cardinals. That to me is going to be critical. When I mentioned before about throwing over the top, I really think that that's something that Seahawks can take advantage of. But I also think that because Green Bay is going to now probably be trying to creep up a couple of other players to try and slow down the Seattle rushing attack that suddenly has some life, then again, I think that there's going to be some opportunities. You're going to have one-on-one coverage. If you make one guy miss, then you might be able to go for a long play. And again, that's something I think that Seattle should be trying to take advantage of in this football game.
At the end of the day, though, you're only going to be able to do so much if the offensive line is not holding up. And I've been encouraged by what we've seen the last few weeks, the continuity that we're starting to see, especially on the right side with Satoa Lamea and Abraham Lucas. You've got Oluwatimi, who's getting more comfortable at the center position since taking over for the now retired Connor Williams. Green Bay, statistically, their defensive line has not jumped off the page with their pass rush, but they've got two guys in the interior. Kenny Clark, he's been a good one for a long time. Don't let his stats this year fool you. He's only got one sack, but this is a guy that has killed the Seahawks in the past. He's a good run defender. He plays with great physicality. He's got underrated athleticism. And then Devontae White, another former Georgia player that the Packers drafted early, he's had some injury issues in the NFL, but he's been healthy this year, and he's playing to the level that we saw when he played on that really good Georgia defensive line. Those two, Rashawn Gary will slide inside sometimes. The Packers have some of those flexible pieces that they can move around. So I'm looking at Seattle's interior offensive line. They got to be able to protect Geno Smith so he can get the ball to the middle of the field and maybe take a few of those shots. And they're still going to have to be able to run the football. If you want to be able to do it like you did last week against the Cardinals or even close to that, to me, the interior offensive line is what's going to determine whether Seattle can run the football and they can consistently get the ball out of Geno Smith's hands and take advantage of some of those matchups they may have at the skill positions.
Yeah, as I mentioned in yesterday's show, I mean, the Green Bay Packers have 16 different players with at least half of a sack. The fact that Kenny Clark only has one of them, is, I think, surprising and I think is misleading. Because he is a little bit like Byron Murphy, a little bit like Jonathan Hankins, in that he eats up more blocks than he actually is able to create in sacks. But he has been one of those, longtime Green Bay Packers who have absolutely destroyed the Seahawks in the past. So slowing him down, I think, is critical. I love that mentioning Rashawn Gary. I mean, he's a guy that can play outside. He can play inside. He's kind of playing the Leonard Williams type of a role that the Seahawks have, of course, and just in his versatility. Former high first-round pick out of Michigan. Mike McDonald might know him and his background very well. There's another player here that we haven't mentioned yet that I'm a little bit worried about just because of what he is able to provide the Green Bay Packers as far as a little bit of a change-up to all these fastballs, so to speak, that the Packers are going to bring. And that's Carl Brooks. He is a little bit more of a Miles Adams. He's got a different body type than a Miles Adams, but he's more of a 6'3", 280-pounder. But damn it, he is slippery. And so if the Seahawks are so focused on trying to block the big bodies at the line of scrimmage, then a guy like Carl Brooks getting names mixed up today. Carl Brooks, for the Packers, again, is a slippery interior pass rusher whose game is just very different than the rest of the Packers. So if Green Bay is struggling to get any type of interior pressure on Geno Smith, then I wouldn't be surprised at all if they changed some things or sent some of their linebackers. They've got some pretty talented linebackers, very gifted pass rushers that might be able to get some pressure. Again, all of that pressure in Geno Smith, that to me, that is one of the things that we have seen a massive adjustment here in the last month in this winning streak, is Geno Smith is being able to recognize the blitzes before they actually happen, do side adjustments, be able to change the play at the line of scrimmage. Sometimes that's runs, sometimes that's quick passes, but again, getting the ball out of his hands quickly. If the Seahawks allow more than 3 sacks in this football game, I have some concerns about if they're going to be able to pull off this victory.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow is going to be a happy Blue Friday. We'll be diving into our game predictions, picks to click, and of course, our game plan for a Seahawks victory. Make sure that you're listening in. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Go Hawks.